Let's talk about kids today, and they are spoiled for choice, both in terms of, career choices, educational options. There's a lot of noise and distraction out there as well. So your advice to the youth of today, because we do have a lot of listeners, who are, looking at career paths. So education and careers and youth today, thoughts on that?
All right, I'm going to start with a little correction because in a sense, the kids that you described who are spoiled for choice are kids in the socioeconomic category A1, A2, maybe B1.
Sure.
The further we go down the pyramid, the fewer the apparent choices. The real choices may be much wider. So what I usually encourage most people to do, and I get a lot of people asking me, particularly from the lower rungs of the privileged categories, a lot of people ask me, what should I be studying? And I usually offer 2 or 3 very simple things. The first is, be really good at English and your home language. If you can, be really good at English, Hindi and your home language.
Right.
Without language, you go nowhere.
Sure.
The second is, do what you love. There's always room for talent, and the chance that you're good at what you love is usually high. Yeah. And the third is, keep at least one plan B. Because you never know what happens. So I know, for example, one young man who was a brilliant aircraft mechanic, maintenance guy, and he was flying very high in a private airline, and then the airline went bust, and now for 4 years, he is having to work on his plan B. He's turning into a supply chain expert,
right.
But it's taken 4 years to go there. So I tell most kids that remember that things might be different when you're mid-career.
Yeah.
So have a plan B, keep a second skill
Yeah.
that will someday come in handy. And it reminds me of a Stephen King book called Eyes of the Dragon, where a commoner girl refuses to marry a prince because he has no skills.
Okay. Yeah. And it's interesting, you mentioned about the fact that have something that you love, to be in the mix as well, something that you're passionate about. But often I also hear people saying that your passion's probably not going to go ahead and pay the bills. However, it may actually keep you on path, when things aren't going right. So thoughts on pursuing your passion. I mean, you're very passionate about music and it's played a big role in your life. So thoughts on passion and...
Well, I can give you examples in both directions. I know of people who prioritized music over everything else and didn't quite make it and ended up a little bit like the starving artist in a garret, bitter at life and all of that. I also know people who just stuck with their passions, but also had the common sense to hear what other people suggest and at least work around the edges of their problems. Right. So my favorite example is India's first commercially successful poet of my generation. Is a guy called Sudeep Sen. So while he is a sellout poet, is invited to do workshops all over the world, is in South Africa 1 week, in Japan the other, and has 1 foot in England. He is also a good photographer, and he is Apple iPhone's ambassador for photography, right? So, so he has got a semi-commercial alternative. So if tomorrow his book stopped selling or his royalties stopped flowing, and he would have another option.
That is a plan B in place.
That is a plan B in place. Another is sort of a nephew of mine. He was trying to study molecular biology, and he liked the subject. I don't think he was passionate about it.
Right.
He was a very talented singer, and he was singing with the Delhi choir, the capital city minstrels. Right. And I said, have you ever considered being an opera tenor? And I was in Bombay in those days, and he was like, I would love to be an opera tenor, but how do I get there? I said, well, we're having a little show in Bombay, and there's a room for a couple of songs there from a vocalist. Come over and we'll see how the audience takes it. So he came, he sang at the NCPA, at the little theatre in front of a small crowd of 110 people. And now he's singing opera at the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden. He taught at a high school because his molecular biology teaching stood him in good stead while he was taking lessons in the UK. And now he is going to, I forget whether it's the first half or the second half of Oxbridge, but he's studying to be a pastor. His wife is a Catholic. So now he has decided he will also spend time on the spiritual side of things because he actually enjoys singing cantatas and things.
Yeah.
You never know where it takes you.
Agreed. Also, I see today that there is, it's almost like this BSO syndrome, like, when you talk about the bright, shiny object syndrome, where someone is going down a path, but then, they're almost, taken off course by something that they may see on, social media, or, potentially like, something that they may have seen through, a mentor. So your advice to people to stick the path, to be patient, because I think there's one thing that's also lacking in a lot of people today is patience and, persisting in one particular path before jumping ship and going down some other route. So ideas and thoughts on that?
I think that worked well for me particularly because I have far too many interests. And there was a time when my dad sat me down and he said, just think about this. What's easier, science as a career and music as a hobby, or the reverse? Do you really want to give up science and do only music? So then I thought really hard about that. And he said, but at the same time, keep your options open, no harm in that. So I used that to get started. And then again, my PhD guide, who was like a second father to me, gave me almost the same advice. He told me that I will not write you a recommendation letter for postdoctoral work in the same field as you've done your PhD. You have to go to your postdoctoral in something else so that your options are wider. So that was a big learning for me. So I stayed with science as a core field, but not with any particular subset of science. I didn't really think I was suited to be a super depth person. So that's the other insight that I learned, that most of us are either depth people or width people. If you figure out which one you are, you're probably better off with that.
Like that, depth person or width person. Yeah. And you're also someone who's always challenged status quo. You've got out of your comfort zone. Like just, in Navi Mumbai, you're with ICI. Was it ICI at the time? ICI at the time. And then, you get a call and say, okay, go teach, kids broadcast journalism and communication. So you've also challenged status quo. You've also put yourself out of the comfort zone. I think that's an important lesson for people as well.
Yeah, that I think came from my dad. So my father was he was a Second World War veteran. He was a doctor. So he trained as a doctor, then he got shipped off to the war. It was a large family, 11 brothers, sisters, and my grandfather died early before partition. So there was a lot of responsibility on the elder brothers. So at the age of something like, he was 26 when he went to war. So by that time, he was an excellent cook, a crack shot, a practicing medical doctor, could do everything that he needed to do to survive on his own. So by the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I knew forest craft because he would take me along. I would be carrying my little .22 rifle with me. So what I learned at quite early in life, or imbibed, I don't think it was formal learning. Right. What I imbibed was that it is up to you to be comfortable wherever you are. The circumstances don't determine it, you do.